The winter dawn broke slowly over the quiet town, a soft gray light filtering through skeletal branches dusted with frost. Snow lay heavy on the rooftops and the cracked wooden planks of the porch where Evelyn Harper sat alone, her breath of fragile mist in the cold morning air. The world around her was hushed, wrapped in a silent, frozen stillness that mirrored the ache coiled deep within her back, and deeper still, within her soul. She pressed a trembling hand to the small of her spine, the pain sharp and unyielding, but it was not this alone that twisted her thoughts. No, it was the loneliness, the invisible weight of whispered judgments that settled like the snow, cold and relentless. "Daddy, my back hurts," she had whispered through the thin line of a telephone just hours before, her voice breaking like brittle ice. The words hung between her and the silence that answered, a silence heavy with unspoken fears and regrets. Silas Harper, weathered and worn like the land he had toiled on all his life, had listened in a quiet that felt like distance, even as worry etched its silent tracks across his face. A father's love lived beneath that stoicism, but it was a love tempered by hardship, by the unyielding demands of survival in a world that showed little kindness to softness. Evie had not always been this way, withdrawn, shadowed by a pain more than physical. There had been a time when her laughter filled the air like warm sunlight on a spring morning, when her eyes sparkled with the wild hope of youth. But the town had turned its gaze cold, the soft smiles replaced with cautious glances and half-hidden whispers. Martha Lou, the town's unofficial herald of gossip, had made sure no one forgot the story they preferred to bury, though no one dared say it aloud. Evie bore the weight of their judgment like a heavy cloak, and every step outside her cabin felt like walking through a storm of unseen needles. In the hush of the cabin's dim light, Evie moved with a careful grace, attending to small tasks that somehow anchored her to the world despite the ache. She tended the fire, the flames flickering shadows against the rough walls, and fed Judah, the great dog who was her constant companion, a silent guardian whose dark eyes seemed to hold all the secrets she dared not speak. Judah never judged. He simply watched, waiting, a presence as steady as the land itself. His paws left soft prints in the snow outside, a gentle reminder that she was not entirely alone. The cold pressed against the windows, a quiet reminder of the harshness outside and within. Each breath was a visible thread woven between past and present, a fragile tether to hope. The back pain was a cruel echo of deeper wounds, wounds inflicted not by the world's physical dangers, but by the sharper edges of silence and isolation. Evie's body ached, but it was her heart that carried the heavier burden. She dared not speak the truth. Not yet. Not while the town's eyes watched and whispered. Silas sat by the hearth hours later, his hands rough and calloused, the lines on his face deeper than the furrows of the winter fields. He had arrived quietly, leaving the weight of his work and worries behind at the ranch. Watching Evie from across the room, he felt the familiar ache of distance, not the kind that miles could measure, but the chasm that had grown between father and daughter, stitched together by years of unspoken words and misunderstood pain. He longed to reach her, to carry some of her burden, but the language they both knew best was silence and steady presence. Outside, the wind whispered through the bare branches, carrying with it the hushed murmurs of the town. The voices of neighbors, cautious and curious, drifted like ghosts in the frozen air. Martha Lou's sharp eyes missed nothing, and her words spread like wildfire in the close-knit community. Evie's name was tied to the story no one wanted to confirm, but no one dared to forget. Yet here, within the fragile walls of the cabin, those rumors found no foothold, only the quiet pulse of survival and the faint flicker of something like hope. Judah patted softly to Evie's side, resting his heavy head on her knee. She closed her eyes, feeling the warmth beneath her fingers, and the cold edge of pain softened, if only for a moment. The dog's steady breath and unflinching loyalty wove a thread of comfort around her bruised heart. He was more than a companion. He was a bridge to a truth waiting patiently to be uncovered. In his calm gaze, there was an unspoken promise that the story had not ended, that the darkness would not consume the light. Evie's fingers trembled as she traced the worn wood of the table, the surface scarred and cracked like her own history. Each mark was a reminder of battles fought silently, scars unseen by the outside world. The ache in her back flared again, sharper this time, and she gasped softly, bending forward. Silas was at her side in an instant, steady hands supporting her, grounding her in the present. The moment held a quiet intensity, no words, only the shared understanding of pain and the fragile thread of connection it wove. The fire crackled, sending flickering shadows that danced on the walls, as if the cabin itself breathed with them. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft and unrelenting, covering the footprints left behind. Inside, a fragile peace settled, a temporary truce between suffering and hope. Evie leaned into Silas's steady presence, her breath mingling with his, a silent acknowledgement that she was not alone in the storm. In the distance, the faint sound of a horse's hooves echoed, a quiet reminder that the world beyond their fragile sanctuary continued to turn, carrying with it new possibilities and old fears. The slow rhythm of life in the winter town beat on, gentle and persistent, like Judah's unwavering vigil. The night was deep, and the cold was a constant companion, but within the walls of that small cabin, something fragile was beginning to stir, something unspoken, yet powerful. The town may have whispered its judgments, and the snow may have covered old wounds, but Evie Harper was still here, surviving, enduring, waiting. And Judah, with eyes that held the wisdom of untold stories, watched quietly, ready to lead them toward a truth that would change everything. The night stretched on, slow and heavy, but within its stillness lay the first fragile threads of a story yet to be told. And so, in the quiet breath between heartbeats, the winter settled in, and with it, the promise of dawn. The night deepened, shadows folding softly into the corners of the cabin as the fire's glow softened to embers. Silas sat close to Evie, his presence steady and unspoken, a fortress built from years of silent care. The ache in her back pulsed like a distant drum, steady but no longer overwhelming, softened somehow by the weight of his calm beside her. Judah lay at their feet, his ears twitching at every whisper of sound beyond the frosted window panes, a sentinel guarding the fragile quiet between them. Outside, the snow had thickened, wrapping the world in a thick, muffled blanket that seemed to hold its breath. Inside, the room held a fragile warmth, a sanctuary from the biting cold and the sharper edges of unspoken fears. Silas's weathered hands rested lightly on Evie's shoulder, his touch a slow balm, gentle as the falling snow. No words passed between them, yet the silence was a language richer than speech, each moment a quiet offering of love and trust. Suddenly Judah rose, his body taut with sudden purpose. He moved toward the door, the soft thud of his paws muffled by the thick snow outside. Evie and Silas exchanged a glance, a mix of curiosity and concern, as the dog's gaze fixed beyond the window, unblinking and intent. He was pulling them gently toward something unseen, something waiting beneath the white stillness. Wrapping a thick woolen coat around her shoulders, Evie rose with Silas's steady support, the pain flaring briefly, but held in check by will alone. Together, they followed Judah into the swirling snow, the cold biting at exposed skin, but no match for the warmth rising quietly in their chests. The world outside was transformed, a winter wilderness of shadows and silver light, each breath a cloud of fleeting smoke in the frozen air. Judah led them through the biting cold, his nose low to the ground, tracing a path that seemed carved out by memory rather than sight. The crunch of their footsteps was the only sound, a quiet rhythm beneath the howl of the wind. The dog stopped at last near a gnarled old oak, its twisted limbs bare against the pale sky. There, half buried beneath the snow, was a small leather pouch, weathered and worn, its edges curled and softened by time. Silas knelt carefully, brushing the snow away to reveal the pouch's contents. A folded letter, yellowed and fragile, its ink faded but still legible in the firelight of a nearby lantern they had brought. Evie's fingers trembled as she unfolded the paper, the words written in a hand both familiar and distant. It was a letter from a man long gone, a secret kept hidden from the town's sharp eyes and whispered tongues. The truth spilled out in careful script, a confession of love, of a promise broken, and of a pain that had never healed. The weight of the letter settled over them like the snow, quiet but profound. Evie's breath hitched, tears pricking at the edges of her eyes as pieces of a hidden past clicked into place. The back pain, the isolation, the shame, they were not hers alone to carry. The town's judgment had been a cruel echo of a secret too fragile to be spoken aloud. Silas's eyes, usually so guarded, softened as he reached out to steady her trembling hands. The bond between them deepened in that shared vulnerability, a bridge built from years of quiet endurance. As the truth unfolded, a new presence stirred in the doorway, a figure cloaked in shadow yet familiar in the soft certainty of his steps. Jed Whisper Calloway, the man who had watched from the edges of the town's whispers, stepped inside. There was no grand proclamation, only the subtle warmth of a coat draped over Evie's shoulders, the careful steadiness of a hand offered without demand. His eyes, dark and unreadable, held a kindness that spoke louder than words. Evie met his gaze, hesitant but not afraid. Between them stretched a fragile thread, unspoken yet undeniable, a slow-burning connection forged in shared understanding and the quiet acts of grace that had become their language. No promises were made, no declarations shouted into the winter wind. Instead, there was presence, patience, and a tender unfolding that promised healing without rushing the fragile heart. Outside, the storm's fury intensified, the wind lashing against the cabin walls as if testing their fragile sanctuary. Inside, tension hummed beneath the surface, an unspoken challenge to the new bonds forming in the firelight. When a sudden knock echoed from the door, the room held its breath. It was Deputy Cole, eyes shadowed but steady, bringing news of a harsh blizzard closing in on the town, a threat not just to bodies, but to spirits already worn thin. Together, they prepared, firewood stacked, lanterns lit, supplies gathered. The storm outside was relentless, a white roar that drowned out all but the beating of hearts and the steady breaths of those inside. Judah's presence was a constant reassurance, his watchful eyes gleaming in the firelight as if guarding the fragile hope blossoming within these walls. Hours passed, the winds howl a backdrop to whispered conversations and quiet gestures, a shared blanket, a gentle touch, a hand resting lightly on a shoulder. In those moments, the walls between pain and hope thinned, and the long shadow of isolation began to lift. Evie felt something shift inside her, a slow thawing, as if the winter's grip was loosening in the warmth of shared humanity. When dawn finally crept through the frosted panes, it brought with it a fragile light that seemed to promise new beginnings. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and sparkling beneath a pale blue sky. Outside, the first soft footsteps of townsfolk broke the silence, their weary eyes no longer full of judgment but of tentative hope. Evie stood at the window, Judah at her side, Silas and Jed close behind. The pain in her back still whispered, but it was no longer a weight dragging her down. It was a reminder of survival, of battles fought in silence and won through quiet grace. She met Silas's gaze, a wordless thank you passing between them, and then looked toward Jed, the promise of what could be flickering gently in the space between them. The truth had been uncovered, and with it, a path forward, a journey from shadow to light, from whispered tales of pain to stories of resilience and love. In that moment, wrapped in the fragile glow of dawn, Evie Harper found not just relief from her suffering, but a new sense of self-worth born from honesty and the slow, steady flame of connection. And as the world outside stirred to life beneath the winter sun, Evie turned toward the future, not with bold declarations or loud promises, but with the quiet certainty of one who has known the depths of pain and chosen grace instead. If you have ever carried a secret too heavy to speak, or felt the cold touch of judgment, know this: healing begins in the small acts of kindness, in the steady presence of those who see you without fear or shame. Sometimes it takes a loyal heart, a dog's unyielding devotion, to lead us back to our own truth. This story, like the winter, reminds us that beneath the cold and silence lies a promise of dawn. Let us hold that promise close and walk toward it with gentle courage. If these whispered tales touch your heart, stay with us for more stories of quiet strength and the unspoken bonds that carry us through life's harshest winters. Subscribe, and let the warmth of these stories light your way.